What is an extremely dark / creepy true story that most people don't know about? William Melcher Dinkle. He would make suicide pacts with young teens and watch them die on web camera, backing out of the pact at the last minute so he could get his jollies over and over. Sick man. From Wikipedia, he was convicted in relation to the suicide of 18-year-old Nadia Kachauji, who became depressed after leaving home to begin university. Melcher Dinkle allegedly suggested that she hang herself, allegedly advising what type of rope to buy, what length and diameter, how to tie the knots, and where to place the noose on her neck. Also, he was sentenced on May 4, 2011 to 360 days in jail. So he's already out of prison. Dennis Nelson usually killed his victims, which were 20 to 30-year-old men, and left their bodies lying around his home for a few days before dismembering them. One victim he killed and left his torso hanging in his bedroom. Another time Dennis found a man stumbling outside. He took him inside and called an ambulance. The next day the man came back to thank Nelson. Nelson killed him. Unit 731. Some of their experiments put the Nazis to shame. Vivisection without anesthesia. Cutting off a foot and putting it where the hand should be. Dipping limbs in liquid nitrogen and then smashing them. And it wasn't just men, women, children, and infants as well. Oh, and they all were pardoned so that the US could gain the data from their experiments. What a wonderful world. The fact that 3 sailors were trapped alive in the submarine wreckage of the USS West Virginia after the attack on Pearl Harbor. They survived for 16 days, kept a calendar, and constantly knocked on the ship's hull in an effort to alert rescuers. However, they were also sitting on tons of sunken live ammunition, and there was no adequate technology to rescue them. Thus, those above ground simply had to listen to a haunting banging noise for 16 days. The story was only recently made public. Edit. I'm using the word submarine in the sense of underwater, not that the USS West Virginia was a literal submarine. West Virginia was a Colorado-class battleship. The Bifor Dolphin Diving Bell Incident. An explosive decompression underwater kills 5 divers. From the wiki. Diver 4, being exposed to the highest pressure gradient, violently exploded due to the rapid and massive expansion of internal gases. All of his thoracic and abdominal organs, and even his thoracic spine were ejected, as were all of his limbs. Simultaneously, his remains were expelled through the narrow trunk opening left by the jam chamber door, less than 60 centimeters, 24 inches, in diameter. Fragments of his body were found scattered about the rig. One part was even found lying on the rig's derrick, 10 meters, 30 feet, directly above the chambers. The unsolved murders at Interkefek. In a small German town on March 31st of 1922. 6 inhabitants of a farm were individually lured into their barn and killed with a mattock or pickaxe. The autopsy also showed that the younger Kazilia had been alive for several hours after the assault. Lying in the straw next to the bodies of her grandparents and her mother, she had torn her hair out in tufts. A few days prior to the crime, farmer Andreas Gruber told neighbors about discovering footprints in the snow leading from the edge of the forest to the farm, but none leading back. He also spoke about hearing footsteps in the attic and finding an unfamiliar newspaper on the farm. Furthermore, the house keys went missing several days before the murders, but none of this was reported to the police. 6 months earlier, the previous maid had left the farm, claiming that it was haunted. The new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived on the farm on the 31st of March, only a few hours before her death. It is believed that the killer or killers had lived in their attic for days, if not longer, before committing the crimes. After the crime had been committed, it is believed that the perpetrator or perpetrators remained at the farm for several days. Someone had fed the cattle and eaten food in the kitchen. The neighbors had also seen smoke from the chimney during the weekend. The story of Rochthe Riewalt, a batshit insane cult leader from Canada. He physically and mentally tortured all the members of the cult, raped the women, performed surgeries on them, brutally punished everyone that didn't do exactly as told, and is responsible for the murder of an infant by leaving it out in the cold. I feel physically ill reading about that man. His death is believed to be the result of an altercation with his cellmate, Matthew Jared MacDonald, 60, of Port Au Port, Endpoint L, who killed Theriault and has been charged with the killing. MacDonald pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison, having already been serving a life sentence for a previous murder charge. MacDonald stabbed Theriault in the neck with a homemade knife. Afterwards, he walked to the guard station, handed them the knife and proclaimed, "That piece of shit is down on the range. Here's the knife, I've sliced him up." GG Selmut. Gloomy Sunday, a song by Rezzo Seris, caused lots of suicide. It is often referred to as the Hungarian suicide song. It starts in 1933 when Hungarian composer Rezzo Seris broke up with his girlfriend on a Sunday. In utter despair he pens Gloomy Sunday. The first publisher rejects his song as too depressing. The second commits suicide. But the third sees the potential and publishes Gloomy Sunday throughout Europe. People start dying immediately. In Berlin, a man shot himself after telling relatives he couldn't get that damn song out of his head. In Rome, an errand boy heard a beggar humming the tune, got off his bike, gave the beggar all his money, and jumped from the nearest bridge. In 1 year alone in Hungary, 17 suicides were found with notes quoting the Gloomy Sunday lyrics. Of course, skeptics dismiss these claims as anecdotal, quoting the rather strange fact that Hungary was so well known for its high suicide rate that 17 people found dead in 1 year clutching the lyrics to a song was par for the course. In 1936 the song reached New York and was marketed as the Hungarian suicide song. Within a week a typist had gassed herself, requesting Gloomy Sunday be played at her funeral. As the death toll mounted, a third verse was added to the song. A happy verse that was intended to counter the depressive urges of the first two. A verse that said, "Wait, it was all a dream. She's not dead. There's no reason to commit suicide. And, look, the sun's coming out." It didn't work. The power of Gloomy Sunday wasn't confined to the lyrics. It was the dirge-like melody. As the BBC found out when they banned Gloomy Sunday, but allowed an instrumental version. A recording was made and released on a 78, which caused panic in North London when a woman kept playing the record over and over. Neighbors banged on her doors, the police were called, the door forced open, and she was found dead inside of an overdose. With the BBC, the US and France all banned the song. Most people think that Newtown or Virginia Tech was the worst incident of mass murder at a US school. They're wrong. Andrew Kehoe's neighbors described him as an intelligent but impatient man. More quietly they spoke of how he had beaten one of his horses to death in a fit of rage when it failed to meet his expectations. His reputation for thriftiness earned him the role of treasurer of the school board in Bath, Michigan, but the other members soon found him difficult to work with. By 1926, his wife became ill with chronic tuberculosis. The cost of her treatments had put a strain on the couple's finances, but Kehoe blamed the school superintendent. Around the same time, he ran for the position of town clerk, which he had been temporarily filling, but was soundly defeated. He took this as a personal rejection by the people of Bath and began to make strange remarks, telling a bus driver he was delivering a paycheck to my boy. "You want to take good care of that check as it is probably the last check you will ever get," or warning a teacher that if she wanted a picnic she would better have it at once. On the morning May 18th, 1927, Kehoe set off firebombs that he had set across his property. He then packed his truck full of pyritol, a repurposed WWI incendiary explosive, and dynamite, and drove into town, telling firefighters arriving at the scene, "Boys, you're my friends. You better get out of here. You better head down to the school." 15 minutes after classes began at the Bath Consolidated School, an alarm clock went off, detonating a stockpile of explosives that Kehoe had hidden there in the basement over the course of months, using his position as a school handyman. The initial blast killed 38 people, collapsed the entire north wing of the school, trapping more in the rubble. A half an hour later, as townspeople had flocked to the school to try and rescue students and teachers from the wreckage, Kehoe pulled up. When he saw the superintendent there, he waved him over, confessed to the bombing. Kehoe then said, "I'll take you with me," and fired the rifle he was carrying into the back seat, detonating the explosives there and killing 7 more people including himself. Investigators found several things when they examined his farm later. He had girdled all his trees to kill them, cut all his fences, and wired the legs of his horses together so he couldn't be rescued from the fire. They found his wife, beaten to death. They found a sign with the words "criminals are made, not born" stenciled on it and tied to the fence. And finally, they found unused farm equipment in his barn that, if he had sold it, would have relieved his financial burden.